The smell of stale coffee and fried onions clung to the air in the small Harlem diner, a scent Lila Monroe knew better than her own perfume. It was a smell that meant survival, a smell that paid for the tiny apartment she shared with her son, Leo. Lila was a single mother in a city that had no mercy for them, and this diner, with its cracked vinyl booths and flickering fluorescent lights, was her battlefield. She felt the loneliness of her routine deep in her bones, a persistent ache that matched the one in her feet after a 12-hour shift. But Lila had trained her face to hide it, offering a warm, if tired, smile to the few patrons who drifted in from the cold New York night. Her days were a blur of wiping counters, refilling coffee cups, and balancing plates on her arm, but every night, just before closing, came the one part of her shift that felt truly human. Hannah would be sitting in the back booth, the one by the window that was fogged with steam. Hannah was a woman who looked like she was made of shadows and old paper, her hands thin and trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the mug of water Lila brought her. She never ordered, she never had any money. And every night, for the past 6 months, Lila would bring her a bowl of the end-of-the-night soup, thick with vegetables and broth and a side of bread. It was against the rules, but her boss, Sal, was usually gone by then, and Lila could not bear the thought of the old woman going hungry. "Here you are, Hannah," Lila said softly, sliding the steaming bowl onto the table. "Chicken noodle tonight. It is a good batch." Hannah looked up, her eyes clouded with age, finding Lila's. A faint smile touched her lips. "You are a good girl, Lila, a very good girl." "We have to look out for each other, right," Lila said, giving the woman's shoulder a gentle squeeze. She would sit for a few minutes while Hannah ate, listening to the older woman's quiet, rambling stories. They were fragments, mostly, of a life that sounded nothing like her current one mentions of large houses, beautiful dresses, and a man she had loved fiercely. Lila listened patiently, believing them to be the gentle fantasies of a mind touched by time and hardship. She saw in Hannah a mirror of her own loneliness, another soul adrift in the massive, indifferent city. Their connection was simple, built on soup and shared silence, but it was genuine. Tonight, the diner was almost empty. The clock on the wall read 10:45 p.m., 15 minutes to close. Lila was wiping down the chrome counter, her mind already on the bus ride home and kissing her sleeping son's head, when the bell above the door chimed. The sound was sharp, cutting through the quiet hum of the cooler. The cold November air blasted into the diner, and behind her, 4 other men. Lila's hand stilled on the counter. These were not the usual Harlem night owls. The first man was tall, dressed in a black wool overcoat that was clearly worth more than Lila's monthly rent. His suit was impeccably tailored, his black hair slicked back, and his face was carved from stone. There was a stillness to him, a dangerous energy that seemed to suck the warmth from the room. His eyes, a startling, cold gray, swept the diner once, assessed, and dismissed everything, until they landed on the back booth. Behind him, 4 other men, all in dark suits, fanned out. They did not look like customers. They looked like predators. One stood by the door, his hand disappearing inside his jacket. Another moved to block the small hallway to the kitchen. They were professional, quiet, and terrifying. The tall man walked past the counter, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the worn linoleum. He walked directly to Hannah's booth. Lila's protective instincts flared. "Excuse me, sir," she called out, her voice slightly shaky but firm. "We are closing in a few minutes. Can I get you something to go?" He ignored her as if she had not spoken. He stopped at the booth and just looked at Hannah, who had frozen, her spoon halfway to her mouth. The old woman was staring at the man, her face pale with a terror so profound that Lila felt a chill race down her spine. "Sir, she's a regular," Lila said, moving out from behind the counter, a wet rag still in her hand. "Please, you're scaring her." The man slowly turned his head to look at Lila. His gaze was heavy, pinning her in place. It was not a look of anger. It was a look of absolute, cold authority. He reached inside his coat, and for a heart-stopping second, Lila thought he was pulling out a weapon. Instead, his hand emerged with a photograph. It was old, glossy, and in perfect condition. He did not hand it to Lila. He placed it with deliberate precision on the table in front of Hannah, next to the half-eaten bowl of soup. It was a picture of a beautiful woman, perhaps in her late 30s, dripping with pearls and wearing a dark red dress. Her hair was styled, her makeup perfect. Her chin held high, she looked like royalty. And beneath the glamour, beneath the decades, the bone structure was unmistakable. It was Hannah. "You were pronounced dead 20 years ago," the man said. His voice was a low, smooth baritone that carried in the silent diner. It held no emotion, which made it all the more frightening. Hannah began to tremble violently, her breath coming in short, gasping sobs. "My name," the man continued, his gaze shifting from the photo to the terrified old woman, "is Vince Moretti." Lila did not recognize the name, but the effect it had on Hannah was immediate. She let out a small, choked cry. "I have been searching for my mother," Vince Moretti said, his voice dropping to a near whisper that was still perfectly audible. "Ever since I learned the truth about my father's lies, I was told you were buried in Sicily, but you have been here, hiding in this place." He gestured, a small, dismissive wave, at the diner. Lila's mind was reeling. Mother. This frail, homeless woman was the mother of this terrifying, wealthy man. Vince Moretti finally turned his full attention to Lila. His cold gray eyes locked onto hers, and in that moment, Lila understood she had stumbled into something far beyond her comprehension. He saw the soup bowl. He saw the familiarity between them. "You," he said, the single word an indictment. "You have been helping her, hiding her." "I did not," Lila stammered. "I just give her soup. I did not know who she was. I still do not understand." Her heart was pounding against her ribs. Vince took a step closer to her. He was tall, and she had to crane her neck to look up at him. The air around him smelled faintly of expensive cologne and something metallic, like cold steel. "You do not need to understand," he said, his voice deceptively soft. "You just need to know that your kindness is now a complication. My mother is coming with me. Tonight." "You cannot just take her," Lila said, horrified. "Look at her. She's terrified of you." Vince Moretti looked at his mother, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at Lila, and for the first time, a flicker of something moved in his eyes. It was not kindness. It was impatience. "She is a Moretti. She belongs with the family," he stated. He then looked around the small, empty diner. "You have a simple life here. You serve coffee. You go home. I suggest you keep it that way." He turned to gesture to one of his men. "Get her." "No!" Lila shouted, moving to stand between the bodyguard and the booth. "You cannot do this." The bodyguard stopped, looking at his boss for instruction. Vince Moretti's face hardened. He looked at Lila, truly looked at her, and his eyes raked over her worn apron, her cheap sneakers, and the fierce, foolish bravery in her eyes. "You have a son, do you not?" he asked. Lila froze. "How did you know that?" "It is my business to know things," Vince said simply. "He is a nice boy. Leo, it would be a tragedy if he had to grow up without his mother, just like I did." The threat hung in the air, sharp and deadly. He was not just threatening her. He was threatening her son. Lila felt the blood drain from her face. This was not a choice between protecting an old woman and staying out of trouble. This was a choice between her life and her son's. The world of the Mafia, a world she had only seen in movies, had just walked into her diner and pointed a gun at the only thing she loved. The threat hung in the diner, thick and suffocating. Lila's breath hitched, her mind screaming, "Leo!" He had said Leo's name. The wet rag fell from her limp hand, hitting the floor with a dull, wet slap. Her protective fury for Hannah evaporated, replaced by a cold, primal terror that was all for her son. At the table, Hannah, who had been a statue of fear, suddenly flinched. The sound of the rag hitting the floor seemed to break her paralysis. She looked at Lila's ashen face, at the raw fear in the young woman's eyes. A new strength, born of guilt, flickered in the old woman's gaze. "Leave her be, Vincenzo." Hannah's voice was a dry, cracked whisper, but it cut through the silence. Vince's head snapped toward his mother. His eyes narrowed. "Do not say my name in this place. You have no right." "I have every right," Hannah said, her voice gaining a sliver of the authority Lila had seen in the photograph. She was still trembling, but her spine stiffened. She turned her gaze, not to her son, but to Lila. Her eyes were filled with a desperate need to explain, to confess. "He is right," she said, her voice breaking. "I am his mother." Lila could only stare, speechless, caught between the menacing stillness of the son and the sudden, painful confession of the mother. "My name was Elena Moretti," Hannah began, and the story poured out of her, a torrent of memory held back for 2 decades. "I was not always like this. I was a wife, a queen. They called me." She spoke of a life Lila could not imagine, a sprawling villa overlooking the sea in Sicily, gardens filled with lemon trees, and a husband, Antonio, who ruled his world with an iron fist and loved her with a frightening passion. She was a powerful woman in that world, respected, feared, and protected. She had worn silk, not polyester. She had dripped with jewels, not shivered from the cold. She had given orders, not begged for soup. Lila listened, horrified and fascinated. She felt the echo of Hannah's pain, the profound loss of a life that had been violently ripped away. The fragmented stories she had dismissed as dementia were real, every single one. "We had a beautiful family." Hannah's voice cracked, and she finally looked at Vince. "He was a beautiful boy. My Vincenzo. He had his father's smile." Vince's expression remained unchanged. He was a statue of cold patience. "Then," Hannah choked on a sob, "Antonio was killed. A car bomb. It was a rival family, a betrayal. Everything changed." The happiness in her story vanished, replaced by a darkness that made Lila's skin crawl. "The life, that world, it swallows you. I was deep in it. Lila, I knew the rules. I knew what they did. I had accepted it. For him. For my husband." She clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "But then they came for my son, and he was 10 years old. Just 10. They wanted to groom him, to make him the new Dawn, to fill his head with violence and honor, to make him a killer." Lila's eyes darted to Vince. He was the living, breathing proof of Hannah's failure. He had become exactly what she feared. "I could not let that happen," Hannah whispered, tears now streaming freely down her wrinkled cheeks. "I could not let them turn my boy into a monster. So I ran. I took what jewels I could hide. I paid people. I died. I became Hannah. I became no one. I did it to protect him, to save him from the life I was drowning in." Lila's heart ached with the tragedy of it. She understood the desperation of a mother. She would do anything for Leo. She finally understood Hannah. But Vince did not. He had not moved, had not shown a single flicker of compassion. When his mother finished her tearful confession, he was silent for a long moment. "You did not save me," he said, his voice flat and devoid of all emotion. "You abandoned me. You left me in that world, alone, with the very monsters you were running from. You know what they did to me when they found out my mother was a traitor who had run—" Hannah flinched as if he had struck her. "You did not protect me," Vince continued, taking a step closer to the booth, his presence overwhelming. "You made me stronger. You taught me that love is a weakness, that family is a lie. I am what I am because you left." He could not accept her story. He would not. In his eyes, her sacrifice was the ultimate betrayal. His quest to find her was not for a joyful reunion. It was to correct an error, to restore his honor. "You are Elena Moretti," he declared, his voice hard. "You are not Hannah. You will not live in the street like garbage. You will not shame my name." He looked at Lila, his eyes like ice chips. "She is coming with me. This life you have been living," he said to his mother, "is over. You will return to the family. You will be cared for, and you will never leave again." He was not asking. He was commanding. He was a man who was used to the world bending to his will. He would use any means necessary to force his mother to return, to erase this 20-year stain on his family's reputation. Lila, watching this brutal family reunion, began to doubt everything. She thought back to all the nights she had sat with Hannah. She remembered how the old woman would jump at loud noises. She remembered the haunted look in her eyes that Lila had mistaken for simple sadness. She had seen the signs of a woman on the run, a woman terrified of her own shadow, but she had been blind to the truth. She had never known the true danger, and now it was standing in her diner, threatening the one person she had in the world. Her act of kindness had become a terrible, dangerous mistake. The threat against Leo solidified in the stale air, a poison that paralyzed Lila where she stood. For a second, all the fight drained out of her, replaced by a hollow, sickening fear. Vince Moretti had not raised his voice, had not moved, but he had just taken her entire world and held it in the palm of his hand. Hannah saw it. She saw the terror extinguish the fight in Lila's eyes. "No," Hannah pleaded, her voice a desperate rasp. She looked at her son. "Vincenzo, please, she has done nothing. This is between us, only us." "It was," Vince corrected, his voice as cold and hard as a slab of marble. "Until she decided to stand in my way, she made herself part of this." He gave a curt nod to the two men nearest the booth. "Take my mother, gently if you can, less gently if you must." One of the men, built like a refrigerator in a suit, stepped forward. "No," the word was ripped from Lila's throat. The fear for Leo was still there, but it was now fuel. A gasoline fire of maternal rage. How dare he? How dare he walk into her life, threaten her child, and try to drag this terrified old woman away? She moved, shoving the small condiment caddy off the counter. It crashed to the floor, metal containers scattering with a sharp, metallic clatter. It was a pathetic show of defiance, but it was all she had. She planted herself in the narrow space between the booth and the man. "You will not touch her," Lila said, her voice shaking but resolute. Her heart felt like it was going to burst through her chest. She was facing 4 men, any one of whom could snap her in half, but she held her ground. The bodyguard stopped, looking to his boss. He was not paid to think, only to obey, and the waitress was not on the approved list of people to move. Vince Moretti sighed, a sound of pure, unadulterated annoyance. He walked toward Lila, stopping just a foot away, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The proximity was overwhelming. He was a wall of muscle and expensive wool, and his gray eyes were utterly devoid of pity. "You are a single mother," he said, not as a question, but as a final, damning fact. "You work in a diner. Your son, Leo, is 5 years old. He goes to the public school on 125th Street. His babysitter is your neighbor, Maria. You are $200 overdrawn on your bank account. You are, in every measurable way, insignificant, and yet you are standing here." Each word was a precise, calculated cut. He was showing her, without question, that his threat was not idle. He knew everything. Lila's blood ran cold, but she did not back down. "If you know all that," she whispered, her throat tight, "then you know I have nothing to lose, except him. And you are not going to make me choose, because you are not taking her." A flicker of something surprise interest crossed Vince's face for a fraction of a second. Then it was gone. He had expected her to crumble. She had not. "You misunderstand the situation," he said, his voice lowering, becoming almost conversational. "You think you are protecting her, but what you are doing is painting a target on her, on yourself, and on your son." "What are you talking about?" "My mother faked her death 20 years ago. She ran from my father's world, but that world did not forget. I am not the only one who has been looking for her. I am just the first one who found her. He leaned in, and Lila fought the instinct to recoil. Right now, you are the only one who knows she is Elena Moretti, but I am here. My men are here. We have drawn attention. How long before a rival family, the same people who killed my father, hears a rumor that a ghost is alive and well in Harlem? What do you think happens then? Do you think they will come in and offer to buy her soup?" The cold, hard logic of his words hit Lila like a physical blow. She'd been so focused on saving Hannah from him that she had never considered he might be the only one who could save her. Her diner, her kindness, had not been a sanctuary. It had been an exposed, brightly lit stage. Lila's realization was suffocating. If Hannah stayed, she was in danger. If she was seen with Lila, Leo was in danger. The only way to keep her son safe was to let this woman go, to let Vince win. "What? What will you do to her?" Lila asked, the fight draining from her voice, replaced by a note of desperate negotiation. "I will take her home." Vince said simply, "I will put her in a house with guards. I will give her the life she was supposed to have. She will be a prisoner. Yes, but she will be a safe prisoner. With me, she is a name. Out here. With you, she is just a loose end." Lila looked at Hannah. The old woman was watching her, her eyes filled with a heartbreaking, resigned sadness. Hannah knew he was right. She had known it the moment he walked in. In that moment of hesitation, Hannah acted. With a burst of agility that shocked Lila, Hannah grabbed the sharp steak knife from the table, the one left over from a previous customer. She held it up, her hand shaking violently, and pointed it not at Vince, but at her own throat. "No!" Vince roared, his cold facade finally breaking. It was the first real emotion Lila had seen from him. "I will not go back, Vincenzo," Hannah cried, the metal tip pressing against her wrinkled skin. I will die here." As Hannah— "Put it down," Vince commanded, taking a step forward. "Stay back." "Lila, help me!" Hannah suddenly cried, her terrified eyes locking on Lila. "Help me get out! The back door, please!" It was a mad, impossible plan, but Lila, seeing the knife, seeing the utter desperation, reacted on pure instinct. She grabbed a steaming pot of coffee from the machine behind the counter. "Now, Hannah!" she screamed. She threw the scalding coffee not at Vince, but at the two bodyguards closest to the kitchen door. The men roared in pain, momentarily blinded, stumbling back. Go!" Lila shoved Hannah toward the hallway. It was chaos. Hannah was surprisingly fast. They made it to the kitchen, a dark, greasy space. Lila fumbled for the deadbolt on the back door, her hands shaking. She could hear shouting from the diner, the heavy sound of men moving. She got the lock undone and shoved the door open into the dark, wet alley. "Run! Hannah, run!" But it was too late. A hand, impossibly strong, clamped down on Lila's shoulder and spun her around. It was not Vince. It was the fourth bodyguard, the one who had been standing by the front door, the one she had forgotten. He had circled the building. Hannah screamed as the bodyguard grabbed her arm. Behind them, Vince Moretti appeared in the kitchen doorway, his face a mask of cold fury. The two other bodyguards were behind him, wiping coffee from their faces, their expressions murderous. The escape had lasted less than 10 seconds. It was hopeless. And Lila, standing in the cold alley, her shoulder aching, realized she had just made the single biggest mistake of her life. She had not just failed to save Hannah. She had declared war on a man who did not lose. The bodyguard's grip was iron, biting into Lila's shoulder as he spun her around and slammed her against the alley's cold, damp brickwork. The impact knocked the breath from her. "Got her!" he yelled back into the diner. In the kitchen doorway, Vince Moretti stood as a dark, furious silhouette. The two guards he had left, their faces red and blistering from the coffee, were right behind him, pushing into the narrow space. But the second bodyguard, lunging for Hannah, was a fraction too slow. Fueled by a lifetime of terror, Hannah did not cower. With a desperate shriek, She lunged at the man, not with the steak knife, but with her hands, clawing at his eyes. He recoiled, shouting in surprise, and in that split second of hesitation, Hannah ran. She bolted, a frail, surprisingly fast figure disappearing into the blackness of the alley. "Get her!" Vince's roar echoed off the bricks. The guard holding Lila cursed, shoving her hard against the wall to join the chase. But Lila, seeing Hannah's impossible sprint, reacted on pure animal instinct. She grabbed the man's arm, sinking her teeth through the thick wool of his suit jacket and deep into the flesh of his forearm. He bellowed in agony, trying to shake her off as she clamped her jaw shut. His pain bought Hannah 2, maybe 3, precious seconds. "Hannah, run!" Lila screamed, just before the guard's free hand cracked across her face in a brutal backhand. Her head snapped back, hitting the brick wall. Stars exploded behind her eyes, and she crumpled to the greasy pavement, the taste of blood filling her mouth. The guard, free of her, sprinted past, his heavy footsteps joining the others. Lila pushed herself up on shaking elbows, her vision swimming. She heard the men shouting at the end of the alley, followed by the sharp, metallic slam of a car door. A moment later, an engine roared, tires squealed, and then silence. They had her. Lila was alone in the alley. Her entire body ached, and a cold, sickening dread washed over her. Far worse than the pain in her head. She had failed, she had fought, and she had lost, and she had made everything infinitely worse. Shakily, she pulled herself to her feet. She stumbled out of the alley onto the street. The diner was dark. Vince's men were gone. Hannah was gone. She was alone. Her first thought, a raw, primal scream in her mind, was Leo. She started to run, not a chase, but a frantic, desperate scramble home. She ran the 6 blocks to her apartment, her cheap sneakers slapping the pavement, her lungs burning, the metallic taste of blood and fear in her throat. She did not know what she would find. Would they be there? Had Vince, in his cold, calculated way, already sent someone? She burst through the lobby, ignoring the broken elevator, and sprinted up the 4 flights of stairs to her apartment. Her key scraped against the lock, her hands trembling so badly she could barely fit it in. The door swung open. The apartment was dark, quiet. "Leo," she whispered, her voice cracking. She ran to his small bedroom. He was there, asleep in his bed, a small lump under the thin blanket, his breathing soft and even. Lila collapsed against the doorframe, her legs giving out, and she sobbed. They were not tears of relief. They were tears of pure, unadulterated terror. He was safe now, but he was not safe. Not anymore. She had just declared war on a Mafia boss. She had bit one of his men. She had helped his mother, a woman who was clearly family property, escape, even if for only a moment. Lila faced the truth, and it was a cold, hard, unscalable wall. Helping Hannah was not a simple act of kindness. It was a death sentence. It was an invitation for a world she did not understand to come in and destroy the only thing she loved. She had seen the look in Vince's eyes. He knew where she lived. He knew her son's name. He knew her schedule, her bank account, her very existence. She could not protect Hannah. She could not even protect herself. Her sense of despair was absolute. There was nowhere to run. She had no money, no power, no one to call. If she went to the police, what would she say, that a rich man had tried to claim his homeless mother? They would think she was crazy. And even if they believed her, they could not protect her from a man like Vince Moretti. He was a ghost, a name, a force of nature, and she had just stood in the path of a hurricane. The guilt was suffocating. She had chosen to help Hannah. She, a mother, had ignored a direct threat to her own child to protect a stranger. What kind of mother did that? The dawning horror was that her compassion, the one part of her she had always held onto in this hard city, was going to be the very thing that got her son killed. She sat on the cold floor of the hallway, watching her son sleep, until the first gray lighting of dawn crept through the dirty window. She could not hide. She could not run. Her only hope was that Vince Moretti had what he wanted, that he had his mother, and that he would forget about the insignificant waitress who had dared to stand in his way. But as she looked at the new, dark bruise forming on her cheek in the hallway mirror, she knew she was not insignificant, not anymore. She was a loose end, and in his world, she knew, deep in her bones. Loose ends were always tied up. The alley was a dead end, a cold cage of brick and foul-smelling dumpsters. Lila was breathing in ragged, painful gasps, her cheek throbbing, her entire body trembling with a terror so profound it was paralyzing. The guard's hand was still clamped on her arm, his fingers digging into her skin like steel bands. Hannah was sobbing quietly as another man held her, his face a grim mask. And then Vince Moretti was there. He walked into the alley, not with the hurried steps of the chase, but with a slow, deliberate pace that spoke of absolute control. The two men who had been scalded were gone, likely in the car with the engine that had roared to life. He was flanked by the guard from the front door. He stopped a few feet away, his expensive overcoat unruffled, his face an unreadable mask in the dim yellow light from the street. Lila braced herself. This was it. He was going to give the order. She was a loose end, a witness, an annoyance. She had bitten his man. She had thrown coffee on another. She was going to die in this alley. Her last thought was a searing, agonizing image of Leo's face. But the order did not come. Vince looked at his mother, his expression flat. "Get her in the car," he said. The guard holding Hannah nodded and began to move her, half carrying, half dragging, toward the street. "No, please," Hannah cried, her voice thin and reedy. "Vincenzo, do not—" Vince did not look back at his mother. His gaze, cold and heavy, settled on Lila. The guard holding her, the one whose arm she had bitten, grunted. "Boss, what about her?" Lila's heart stopped. She squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for the blow, the shot, the end. "Let her go," Vince said. The guard's grip loosened in surprise. He looked at Vince as if he had misheard. "Boss," I said. Vince's voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. "Let her go." The guard instantly released his hold. Lila stumbled, her legs too weak to hold her, and she propped herself against the filthy brick wall. She stared at Vince, her mind unable to process the command. He took a step closer, and the guard who had held her melted back into the shadows, leaving them alone. Vince was close enough now that she could see the faint lines around his eyes, the hard set of his jaw. He was not just a monster, he was a man, and he was looking at her with an intensity that was more than just anger. It was something else. It was analytical. It was confused. Lila, despite her terror, found herself looking back. She was not just looking at her son's potential killer. She was looking at the man whose cold facade had cracked when his mother held a knife to her own throat. She was looking at the decisiveness, the raw power that emanated from him like a physical force. It was terrifying, and, in a way that made her feel sick and ashamed, it was mesmerizing. She, who had felt powerless her entire life, was standing in front of the epitome of power, and he had just told his man to let her go. "You," he said, his voice quiet. It was not a question. "Why?" Lila blinked, her bruised face aching. "What?" "Why did you do it?" he asked. His eyes were not cold. Not anymore. They were searching. "You have a son. I told you about your son. I held his life in my hand, and you still bit my man. You still threw coffee. You still fought me. For her." He gestured toward the street, where the car was now idling. "A woman you gave free soup to. Why?" He was genuinely baffled. In his world, loyalty was bought with blood or money. Fear was the only currency that mattered. He had used fear, the ultimate weapon, and it had failed. He did not understand. Lila swallowed, the taste of blood and adrenaline in her mouth. She should have been silent. She should have begged. But his question, his genuine confusion, sparked a tiny ember of the defiance she had felt earlier. "You said it yourself," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I have a son." "That is my point," Vince said, his brow furrowing slightly. "You should have been on your knees begging for his life." "She's a mother," Lila said, pushing herself off the wall, though her legs were still shaking. She was trying to protect her son. "From you, from what you are." Lila's eyes met his. "You do not get it, do you? You think you can threaten one child, and that makes a mother stop caring about what happens to someone else? You think fear is all there is?" She was rambling, she knew it. She was probably signing her own death warrant, but she could not stop. The words poured out of her, born of terror and a strange, new anger. Vince just watched her. He did not move. He just listened, his head tilted slightly, as if she were a puzzle he was trying to solve. The silence that followed her outburst was deafening. He had all the power, and she had just insulted him, his life, his very being. Then he did something that shocked her more than any threat. He smiled. It was not a smile. It was a faint, almost imperceptible tilt of one corner of his mouth. It lasted for a second, but it changed his entire face. It softened the stone, let a flicker of warmth into his gray eyes, and in that second Lila's breath caught in her chest. The pull was undeniable. It was a sudden, violent jolt of attraction, so profound and so misplaced that it made her feel dizzy. "You're brave," he said, the smile vanishing as quickly as it came, "and you are stupid. It is a dangerous combination." He looked at her, and his gaze was different. It was no longer cold. It was hot. It was a look that stripped her bare, that saw the fear and the fight, and seemed to appreciate both. It was a look that said he understood her in a way no one else ever had. "Go home, Lila," he said, his voice a low, gravelly command. "Go home to your son. I have my mother. Our business is concluded." He turned to walk away. Will I see you again?" The question was out of her mouth before she could stop it. She did not know why she asked it. Part of her was terrified he would say yes. Part of her was terrified he would say no. Vince stopped but did not turn around. He paused, his back a rigid, powerful line of black wool. "Pray that you do not," he said, and then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness of the alley, leaving Lila alone, shaking and hopelessly, terrifyingly alive. She'd met the enemy. She'd seen the man. And she was beginning to realize that the cold, heartless Mafia boss was not nearly as cold as she had first believed. That realization was, perhaps, the most dangerous thing of all. The next 2 days were a blur of muted, heart-pounding terror. Lila moved through her life like a ghost. Her world shrunk to the 2 blocks between her apartment and the diner. Every car that slowed down, every man in a dark coat, every person who looked at her for a second too long sent a jolt of icy adrenaline through her system. She had called in sick to the diner the first day, a decision born of sheer, paralyzing fear. But she had no money. She had to work. She left Leo with Maria, her hands shaking so much she could barely fasten his coat, and walked to the diner, feeling like a target. Sal, her boss, had grunted about the broken condiment caddy and the coffee-stained kitchen floor, but he was too cheap to fire her. The diner was quiet. The back booth where Hannah used to sit was just a booth, empty and meaningless, but to Lila, it was a glowing neon sign marking the spot where her life had ended. She was wiping down the counter on the 3rd night. Her nerves stretched so thin they felt like they were vibrating. When the bell above the door chimed, it was early, only 7 p.m. It was him. Vince Moretti walked in, and this time, he was alone. He was not wearing the heavy overcoat. He was in a perfectly tailored gray suit that made his shoulders look impossibly broad. He looked less like a specter of death and more like a high-powered CEO. But the lethal energy was still there, coiled under the expensive fabric. Lila's hand froze on the counter. The other 2 patrons, truck drivers nursing coffee, did not even look up. Vince did not sit at the counter. He walked around it, invading her space, and stood near the coffee machines. "You are a difficult woman to protect," he said, his voice a low rumble. Protect, Lila's voice was a choked whisper. You are the one I need protection from. Not anymore, he said. He looked tired. The iron control was still there, but she could see the faint, dark shadows under his eyes. You and your son, you are both in danger. And this time, it is not from me. Lila felt a flash of anger, so hot it momentarily burned away her fear. What did you do? You said our business was concluded. I thought it was... He leaned a hand against the stainless steel counter, and she had the insane urge to pull away, as if he might burn her. My rivals, he said. The Galliano family. They are the ones who killed my father. They have been watching me for months. They knew I was looking for a ghost. They just did not know who. Now they do. He looked directly at her, his gray eyes searching. They were watching the diner. Lila, they saw you with her. They saw you, night after night, talking to my mother. The room tilted. They think I am working with you. Worse, they think you were working with her. They think she was not just hiding. They think she was planning. They think she was feeding you information, secrets about my organization. They think you are her partner. That is insane, Lila hissed, slamming the wet rag down. She was a homeless old woman, and I gave her soup. It does not matter what is true, Vince said, his voice hard. It only matters what they believe, and they believe you are a threat. They will come for you. They will try to get to my mother through you. And when they find out you know nothing... He did not have to finish the sentence. Lila leaned against the counter, her legs weak. But you have her. You have Hannah. Just tell them. Tell them you have her, and I am nobody. This was it, the moment where he would tell her she was safe. Vince's expression tightened. He looked away from her, toward the empty back booth. I do not have her. What? The night I took her, he said, his voice flat with a self-directed anger that was almost frightening. I put her in a secure town car. I took her to my estate. I put 2 guards on her door. And within 3 hours, she was gone. She picked the lock on her door, climbed out a bathroom window, and scaled a 12-foot wall. She's been running for 20 years. She's better at it than my men are at stopping her. The secret landed on Lila like a ton of bricks. Hannah was gone. Vince had lost her. And now, the Gallianos, a rival Mafia, were looking for a ghost. And the only person they had seen her with was Lila. Oh my God, Lila whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. Leo... They know about him too, Vince said. And the quiet confirmation was the most terrifying thing he had ever said. So what now? Lila demanded, her voice rising in panic. What do I do? You have to help me. You did this. You brought this to my door. I am trying, he said, his voice laced with an irritation that felt shockingly human. That is why I am here. He paused, and his expression changed. The hard-as-nails Mafia boss was gone, and for a second, he just looked like a man haunted by his own past. When I was 10, he said, his voice so quiet she had to lean in to hear him. My father was killed, a car bomb. I was supposed to be in the car, but I had dropped a toy. A small, stupid wooden soldier. I ran back inside to get it. That is the only reason I am alive. Lila's anger faltered. She saw, for a fleeting moment, the boy he had been. My mother... She fell apart, and then she vanished. She just left me. I was taken by my uncle, and I was taught. They hammered the grief and the fear out of me and replaced it with this. He gestured to himself, to the suit, to the power that surrounded him. I became the heir to an empire I never wanted. I became the monster she was running from because she ran. I am what I am because I had no choice. His confession hung in the air, a raw, exposed nerve. He was not just a killer, he was a survivor, just like her. Now, he said, his gaze becoming intense, you have a choice. It is not a good one. You can stay here, in your life, and wait for the Gallianos to come, and they will come. Or, you and your son can come with me. Now. Tonight. Lila was stunned. Come with you, where to your world, to be a prisoner, like you were going to make your mother. To be protected, he countered, his voice rising for the first time. I have a place. It is safe. They will not find you. I will keep you and your son safe until I find my mother and end this. Lila stared at him, her heart warring with her head. This was madness. This was the man who had threatened her, the man who lived a life of violence and crime, and he was offering her sanctuary. But it was not just an offer. It was a command, because she knew, as she looked into his determined, haunted eyes, that she had no other option. To stay was to die. To stay was to let them find Leo. Her entire life, the diner, her apartment, her independence, it was all gone. It had evaporated the moment she gave a kind woman a bowl of soup. And what happens after? She whispered. Vince held her gaze. The dangerous, magnetic pull she had felt in the alley was back, stronger this time, mixed with this new, terrifying understanding of the man he was. After, he said, we see. She was struggling with the undeniable truth. She was trapped by the Mafia. But the man she was falling for, he was the Mafia too, and he was her only way out. Get your son, Vince Moretti commanded, not as a threat, but as a promise. We are leaving. The command was absolute. Get your son. We are leaving. Lila's world, which had been teetering on a knife's edge for days, finally shattered. This was not an offer. It was a sentence. She was trading one cage for another, but this new cage was the only one that might keep her son alive. My neighbor is watching him, she stammered, her mind racing. Your men, the Gallianos, they are not at my apartment. Not yet, Vince said, his voice hard, but they will be. We have no time. Is there a back entrance? A fire escape into the alley. Good. He grabbed her arm, his touch firm but not rough, pulling her toward the diner's back door. My car is parked 1 block west of your building. We walk. Do not run. Do not look panicked. You are a waitress walking home. I am just a man. Do you understand? Lila nodded, her throat too dry to speak. The walk was the longest 6 blocks of her life. Every shadow held a phantom, every passing headlight a potential killer. Vince walked beside her, a half step ahead, a broad, dark shield. He was hyper-aware, his head constantly scanning, but his pace was infuriatingly calm. He was a predator moving through his own jungle, and she was the prey he was claiming. When they reached her building, he stopped her at the alley's entrance. Go. Get him. Do not say goodbye to your neighbor. Tell her it is a family emergency. Tell her whatever you must. Be less than 5 minutes. I will be at the end of this alley. He melted into the darkness, and Lila was alone. She ran up the fire escape, Antasia, her heart hammering. The metal rungs were cold and slick. She burst into her apartment, her neighbor Maria looking up from the television, startled. Lila, what is wrong? You look like you have seen a ghost. Emergency, Maria, Lila panted, rushing to the bedroom. Leo was asleep, a small, perfect mound under his blanket. She scooped him up, her movements frantic. He stirred, murmuring in his sleep, and she held him so tightly it was almost painful. Family emergency, I have to go. I'm so sorry. She grabbed her purse and Leo's small jacket. Shoving his feet into his shoes, Maria was at the door, confused and worried, but Lila had no time for explanations. I will call you, I promise. She fled, carrying Leo, back down the cold, rattling fire escape. Her son was heavy, and her arms ached, but the fear gave her a desperate strength. Vince was there, a shadow detaching itself from the wall. He did not speak. He just took her elbow and steered them toward the street, a black sedan, nondescript and powerful, slid to the curb as if summoned. Vince opened the back door, and Lila fell in, clutching Leo. Vince got in the driver's seat. He was alone. Where are your men? Lila asked, her voice trembling. I cannot trust them, he said, his eyes fixed on the rearview mirror as he pulled away from the curb. Not all of them. What are you talking about? I am being followed, he said, his voice flat. There is a black van. That is the Gallianos. They have been 3 blocks back since I left my office, but there is another car, a blue sedan. They have been on me all day." "Who is that?" "That," Vince said, his jaw tightening, "is my own crew, my own capo. Someone in my organization is leaking my every move to the Gallianos. I am being watched by the enemy, and I am being watched by my own family." Lila's blood ran cold. They were not escaping to safety. They were in a trap, and the walls were closing in from every side. "So we are just driving?" Lila asked, her panic rising. "We are going to a safe house, a place no one knows about." Vince's eyes flicked to the mirror again. "But we have to lose them first." He made a sudden, sharp right turn, cutting across 2 lanes of traffic. Horns blared. Behind them, the black van followed, plowing through the intersection. The blue sedan was caught by the light. "One down," Vince muttered. He sped up, diving into the labyrinth of industrial Harlem. He took a left, then another. He was driving with a focused, lethal precision, but the van was still there. He turned into a narrow alley, then another, and then he slammed on the brakes. A dead end, a high brick wall was in front of them, in the rearview mirror. Lila watched in horror as the black van skidded to a stop, blocking the alley's only entrance. "Stay in the car," Vince commanded. "Lock the doors. Do not move, and do not make a sound, no matter what you hear. Do you understand me?" "Vince, no," she pleaded, seeing 4 men pile out of the van. "Lock the doors, Lila," he roared. He was out of the car before she could say another word. The central locks clicked shut. Vince walked toward the 4 men. He did not run. He did not pull a weapon. He just walked, his suit jacket unbuttoned. Lila watched, her hand over her mouth, holding back a scream. Leo was awake now, his eyes wide and scared. "Mommy, who are those men?" "Shh, baby, it is okay. We are playing a game." The lead Galliano, a man with a thick neck, sneered, "Nowhere to run. Moretti, just give us the girl. We just want to know what the old woman told her." "The girl is under my protection," Vince said, his voice carrying in the narrow alley. "This is Moretti business. You made a mistake. You're alone, Vince, and your own family is selling you out. You have no protection." "I am all the protection I need," Vince said. The fight was fast, brutal, and terrifying. Lila had only seen this kind of violence in movies, but this was real. It was not flashy. It was economical and deadly. Vince moved with a speed that defied his size. He disarmed one man, and the sound of a bone snapping was sharp and sickening. He used one man as a shield against another. It was over in less than a minute. 2 men were on the ground, groaning. The other 2 were scrambling back to the van, one dragging the other. Vince did not pursue them. He watched them drive off, his chest heaving slightly, his knuckles bleeding. He got back into the car, his face a mask of controlled fury. He said nothing, just put the car in reverse and got them out of the alley. They drove for another 20 minutes, to a part of the city Lila did not recognize. All warehouses and abandoned factories. He pulled into a nondescript garage, and the door sealed behind them. He led them inside a fortified bunker. It was clean, sterile, and had no windows. Leo immediately fell asleep on a small cot. Lila was shaking, the adrenaline fading, leaving her cold and empty. She watched Vince at the sink, washing the blood from his hands. "That is your life," she whispered, her voice full of horror. "That is what you do." "It is the life that is keeping you alive," and he replied, his back to her. "For how long?" she cried, the tears finally coming. "For how long, Vince? What happens when you are not fast enough? What happens when they find this place?" "My son. He just saw that. You are dragging him into your world of death." "I am protecting him." Vince spun around, his eyes blazing. "This is not protection, this is a cage," she screamed, all her fear and rage pouring out. "I cannot stay here. I cannot let my son grow up in this. I will not let him become one of your soldiers, like you." The words hit him harder than any physical blow. "Like you." He stared at her, the anger draining from his face, replaced by something she had never seen before, a deep, profound exhaustion. He looked at his own bloody knuckles, then at the steel door. He heard his mother's voice in his head. I could not let them turn my boy into a monster. He was doing it. He was doing to Leo the exact same thing his family had done to him. He was trapping a child. No, he said, his voice thick. He turned away from her, bracing his hands on the concrete wall, his head bowed. No, Lila said, confused by his sudden change. No, he repeated, turning back to her. His eyes were clear, and the decision in them was absolute. He will not become like me. You are right. This is not a life. It is just an existence. He looked at the steel door, no longer seeing it as a shield, but as the bars of his own prison. I have spent my whole life building this, he said, his voice quiet. This empire of fear. I did it to honor my father. I did it because I thought I had no choice. He took a step toward her. I cannot do it anymore. Lila stared, speechless. The Mafia boss, the most terrifying man she had ever known, was unraveling in front of her. I am going to get you out, he said, his voice raw with a new, terrifying conviction. Both of you, not just from the Gallianos, from me, from all of it. How? She whispered. You said it yourself. We are trapped. Your own family is betraying you. There is only one way to stop being the monster, Vince said, his eyes locking onto hers. You have to destroy the cage. His decision hung in the sterile air of the bunker, a statement so profound, so earth-shattering, that Lila could only stare at him. Destroy the cage, she whispered. Vince looked at her, his eyes stripped bare of the cold authority he had worn like armor. He looked like the 10-year-old boy who had run back for a wooden soldier, a man forced to become a king, who had just realized his crown was a trap. Before he could answer, a heavy, metallic thud echoed from the steel door of the garage, followed by another. It was not a knock. It was a summons. Vince was in motion instantly, the transformation back into the lethal predator so fast it gave Lila whiplash. He shoved her and the half-asleep Leo toward the small bedroom. Stay inside. Do not make a sound. Who is it? She breathed, her heart seizing. The Gallianos. No, Vince said, his voice a low, cold growl. He checked the magazine of the gun he had pulled from a lockbox under the sink. They would have used explosives. This is someone who thinks they have a key. He moved to the door, listening. Lila, clutching Leo against her chest, hid just inside the bedroom, her body trembling. A voice called from the other side, muffled but clear. Vincenzo, open this door. We know you are in there. Stop this foolishness. Lila saw Vince's entire body go rigid. He recognized the voice. He turned, and his face was a mask of pale, cold fury. He looked at Lila, and his eyes were full of a terrible, dawning realization. He opened the door. Standing in the garage, flanked by 4 of Vince's own men who had been loyal to the Moretti family for years, was his capo, Marco, when he was an older man, in his late 50s, with graying hair and a face that usually looked kind. He had been Vince's father's right-hand man. He was the one who had taken Vince in after his mother died. Marco, Vince said, his voice lethally calm. He did not lower his weapon. You are tracking me. Of course I'm tracking you, Marco said, badly, stepping into the bunker. His men fanned out, their intentions clear. This was not a rescue. You have gone mad. Vince, disappearing, ignoring counsel, starting a war with the Gallianos over a waitress. She's under my protection, Vince said. She is a loose end, Marco snapped, his kind uncle facade vanishing. And you were supposed to be better than this, but you are just like your father. You leave my father's name out of this, Vince growled. I wish I could, Marco shouted, his face reddening. But you had to go digging, did not you? You had to go looking for the ghost. You could not just let your mother stay dead. A terrible silence descended, heavy and cold. What are you talking about? Vince asked. You think she ran to protect you? Marco laughed, a short, barking sound. That is what she told you, is it not? That is the lie she told herself. From the bedroom, Lila watched, frozen in terror, as the entire power dynamic of the room shifted. She ran, Marco said, Don stepping closer to Vince, because she was a coward. She ran because she could not live with the truth I had to carry. What truth? Vince's voice was barely a whisper. The truth about your father, Marco said, his eyes hard as diamonds. Antonio, well, he was not a good Don. Vince, he was sentimental, he was weak, and in the end, he was going to destroy us all. He was talking to the feds. He was going to turn state's evidence, betray the entire family, to save his own skin. Vince's face was ashen. No, that is a lie. The Gallianos killed him. The car bomb. The Gallianos had nothing to do with it, Marco said, his voice dropping. It was an internal matter, a cleansing. Your father had to be dealt with, for the good of the family. The world stopped. The secret, a 20-year-old monster, was finally out of its cage, and it was devouring everything. You, Vince breathed, the comprehension dawning, horrific and absolute. You killed him. I did what had to be done, Marco said, his voice full of a righteous, chilling conviction. I took out the poison. I saved this family. I gave you the empire you have today. Vince's whole life, his entire identity, had been built on a lie. His vengeance against the Gallianos, the driving force of his entire adult life, was a fraud. The man he had loved as a father figure, the man who had mentored him, was the man who had orphaned him. And my mother, Vince choked out the words. She knew. She knew, Marco said with disgust. She knew he was a rat. She just could not approve the new management. She ran. She abandoned you. Abandoned the family, rather than stand by the man who saved it. I have been cleaning up her messes ever since, and now you bring her back. You bring this. He gestured angrily at Lila, hiding in the doorway. Lila felt the weight of her decision, her act of kindness, giving soup to a cold, old woman, had been the butterfly wing that started this hurricane. She had unearthed a secret that had been buried in blood. It is over, Vince, Marco said, his voice softening, attempting to regain the old, familiar dynamic. You had your moment of weakness. It is fine. We all get one. But now it stops. Give me the girl and the kid. They are the last link to your mother. We will make them disappear. We will say the Gallianos got them. It will reignite your focus. We will wipe out the Gallianos, take their territory, and everything goes back to the way it was. Family first, just like I taught you. The choice was laid bare. It was stark and brutal. On one side was Marco, his family, his entire past, his empire, the life that had been built for him on a foundation of lies and murder. All he had to do was sacrifice the woman and child. On the other side was Lila and Leo, his future, the truth. Vince stood in the center of his shattered world. He looked at Marco, the man who had made him a king, who was now holding a gun to his head. Then his gaze shifted, moving past Marco to the bedroom doorway. He looked at Lila, her face pale with terror, her arms wrapped around her sleeping son. She was everything his world was supposed to destroy, innocent, brave, and stupidly, beautifully compassionate. He had just told her he would destroy the cage. He did not realize the cage was standing right in front of him. Vince slowly, deliberately lowered his gun. He let it hang at his side. You are right, Marco, Vince said, his voice heavy. Family first. Marco smiled, a thin, relieved expression. Good boy, Vince. Now, the girl. But you, Vince interrupted, his voice dropping to an icy whisper, are not my family. He moved. It was not a choice. It was a detonation. Vince raised his gun and fired, not at Marco, but at the light switch high on the wall. The bunker was plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The room exploded in gunfire. The sound was deafening in the concrete box. Lila screamed and threw herself over Leo, shielding him with her body as the world was reduced to muzzle flashes and the smell of cordite. She heard men shouting, furniture crashing. This was not a fight, it was a massacre. And in the center of it, she knew Vince was fighting, not for his father's memory, not for his empire, but for them. He was choosing love, and the price, she realized with a sickening certainty, was going to be paid by everyone in this room. The darkness was absolute, a thick, suffocating blanket instantly filled with the concussive, deafening roar of gunfire. Lila screamed, a sound swallowed by the chaos, and threw her body over Leo, pressing him into the flimsy mattress, shielding his head with her hands. He was crying, a terrified, muffled wail against her shirt. The concrete bunker became a tomb of echoing thunder. Muzzle flashes, sharp and white, provided strobe-like glimpses of a horrific ballet. She saw Vince, not as a man, but as a silhouette, a center of pure, focused violence. He was not just fighting, he was hunting. He knew this space. They did not. She heard men shout, curse, and fall. The sound of bodies hitting the concrete was sickeningly heavy. She squeezed her eyes shut, praying for it to end, praying for Leo, praying for... She did not even know what she was praying for. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. The silence that rushed in was more terrifying than the noise. It was thick with the smell of cordite and copper. Lila could hear a high-pitched ringing in her ears. Leo was still sobbing, his small body trembling against hers. "Vince," she whispered, her voice a raw, cracked thing. No answer. "Vince," she cried, louder this time, her terror shifting. "In here," a voice grunted from the main room. It was low, strained, and filled with pain, but it was his. Lila moved, her limbs shaking so badly she could barely stand. She left Leo in the bedroom. "Hide, baby, hide for one more minute. Do not come out." She crept into the main room. The darkness was no longer total. A single, small emergency light above the door had flickered on, casting a weak, greenish glow over the scene. It was a charnel house. Marco's men were down, all 4 of them. Marco himself was slumped against the far wall, his eyes open and sightless. His betrayal and his ambition ended on a concrete floor. And in the center of the room stood Vince. He was leaning heavily against the small kitchen counter, his gun on the floor by his feet. His gray suit was torn and dark with blood. His left arm was clamped tightly to his side, and a crimson stain was spreading, dark and massive, across his white shirt. He looked up as she entered, and his eyes were not the eyes of a Mafia boss. They were just the eyes of a man who had reached the end. "You are hurt," she breathed, rushing to him. The fear was gone, replaced by a sudden, overwhelming need to keep this man, this impossible, violent, broken man, on his feet. "It is nothing," he grunted, but a wave of dizziness made him sway. She grabbed him, her small frame straining to support his weight. "That is not nothing, Vince." He looked at her, his face pale and slicked with sweat. His hand, the one not holding his side, came up. His fingers were bloody. He gently, almost reverently, touched the bruise on her cheek, the one his own man had given her. "I did this," he whispered, not just referring to the fight, he meant all of it, the diner, the fear, the running. "I brought this on you, on your son." "We are alive," she said, her voice fierce, tears streaming down her face. "You kept us alive." He looked around the room, at the bodies of the men who had been his family. "This is not living, Lila. This was an execution. I just dismantled my own empire." He let out a harsh, pained laugh. "My father's legacy, I destroyed it in 30 seconds. It was a legacy built on a lie," she said, her hands moving to the wound in his side, pressing down, trying to staunch the bleeding. Marco lied to you, your whole life." "I know," he said, his voice raw. He looked down at her hands, covered in his blood, and his gaze softened. In the midst of death, of his entire world collapsing, this small, brave woman was holding him together. He knew, in that moment, that he would have torn down the world for her. And he just had. "We need to go," she said, her practicality a sudden, sharp anchor. "The Gallianos and everyone, they will be looking." "They will not be looking for Vince Moretti, Don of the family," he said, his voice gaining a hard, new edge. "Because as of tonight, he no longer exists." He pushed himself off the counter, wincing, and moved to a small, hidden safe in the wall. He entered a code, his bloody fingers slipping. "Vince, what are you doing?" "The cage," he said, pulling out a small, encrypted hard drive and a satellite phone. "I told you I would destroy it." I thought this was destroying it," she said, gesturing to the carnage. "This," he said, "is cutting off the head, but the body still exists. The money, the accounts, the properties, the network. It is all still there. And as long as it is, someone else will just step in. Maybe the Gallianos, maybe another of my capos. They will still hunt for my mother. They will still hunt for you." He looked at the hard drive in his hand. "This is everything. Every account number, every contact, every ledger, every single secret. From my father's time to mine, Marco's betrayal, the Gallianos' network, everything. It is the real Moretti legacy." "What are you going to do?" Lila asked, her heart pounding. "I am going to do what my father was supposedly going to do," Vince said, a dark irony in his voice. "I'm going to give it all away." He picked up the phone. He was making the most unprecedented decision a man in his position could make. He was not just abdicating. He was committing organizational suicide. He was sacrificing $1 billion empire, a lifetime of power, and the only identity he had ever known. He was going to set fire to the entire Mafia structure of New York, just to create a future for himself and this waitress. He knew that by doing this, he was signing his own death warrant. He would be a traitor to everyone, the Gallianos, his own family. Every crew in the city would want his head, but it was the only way to make sure no one would have the power to hunt for Lila ever again. "This is the final sacrifice. Lila," he said, his thumb hovering over the call button. "Once I do this, there is no going back. We will be hunted by everyone. We will have nothing, no money, no power, just each other." "We will have Leo," she corrected, her voice soft but strong, "and we will be free." He held her gaze, and in that moment, their relationship was sealed. It was not a romance born of gentle looks and shared dinners. It was a bond forged in blood, terror and a shared, desperate need to survive. They were two broken halves of a whole, and they needed each other to exist. He made the call. "I have a package for you." "Yes, it is from Vince Moretti. It is a gift. Everything. You have 1 hour before it goes public. I suggest you move fast." He ended the call and threw the phone against the wall, where it shattered. "It is done," he said. He slumped, his energy finally giving out, the adrenaline and the blood loss catching up to him. Lila caught him. "Now," she said, her voice the one in command, "we get you patched up, and then we start our new life." Vince, the fallen king, leaned on her, and for the first time in his life, he let someone else be strong. The bunker was a tomb, and they were the only survivors. Lila, her hands shaking, ripped open the bunker's Spartan first aid kit. She worked with a desperate, focused energy, cleaning Vince's wound. It was a deep, ragged gash in his side, bleeding profusely. He hissed in pain as she pressed a sterile gauze pad to the wound, but he did not pull away. His eyes never left her face, watching her with a raw intensity that was no longer about power, but about a terrifying, fragile trust. "You're gonna have to drive," he grunted, his face pale. "I know," she said, her voice trembling but firm. She wrapped bandages around his torso, pulling them tight. "Can you walk?" "I will," he said. He grabbed the hard drive, shoved it deep into the pocket of his bloody suit jacket, and then leaned on her. She took Leo, who was awake and in a state of quiet shock, and put him in Vince's good arm. "He walks between us," Vince commanded, his voice weak. They left the bunker, a fortress that had become a grave, and got into the sedan. Lila's hands shook so badly she could barely get the key into the ignition. She drove, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she had to get away from the city. She drove for hours, heading west, away from New York, away from the empire that was, at that very moment, tearing itself apart. The news reports started about 3 hours later, filtering in on the car radio. The anchors were confused, reporting on a massive, coordinated series of raids, on prominent city figures being arrested, on banks freezing accounts, and on rumors of a massive information leak that had brought the entire criminal underworld to its knees. The Moretti family was gone. The Galliano family was crippled. The city's power structure had been decapitated. Not by the police, but by a ghost. Lila looked at the man slumped in the passenger seat, his head resting against the window, his eyes closed. He was not a king. He was not a monster. He was just a man, and he had set fire to his own world for her. They drove for 2 days, stopping only for gas and to let Lila clean and redress his wound. He had a fever, but he never complained. He just watched her, and he watched Leo. 1 year later, the city of New York felt like a different planet. They lived in a small, sun-drenched bungalow in a town so quiet you could hear the wind in the cornfields. Lila, now Laura, worked part-time at the town library. Vince, who now went by Vic, had used the last of the clean cash he had in the bunker, a few $1,000s, to secure the rental and a used truck. He worked for a local construction crew, a job that left his hands calloused and his body tired in a way that had nothing to do with violence. He had lost his empire. He had lost his name. But he was, for the first time in his life, free. The shadows of their past were long. Lila still woke up sometimes, her heart pounding, from nightmares of the alley. Vince Vic had them, too. She would find him on the small front porch at 3 in the morning, staring at the peaceful, empty street, his hands clenched into fists. But now, instead of turning away, she would come out and sit with him. She would slide her hand into his, and his fingers would unclasp, lacing with hers. They did not need to talk about it. They were each other's anchor. Their relationship was not a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, quiet rebuilding. It was in the way he drank the coffee she made him every morning, exactly how he liked it. It was in the way she would find her car gassed up, or a loose shingle on the roof mysteriously repaired. It was in the way he looked at her, his gray eyes, which had once been so cold, now filled with a steady, quiet warmth that was reserved only for her. One warm evening, she was in the kitchen packing Leo's lunch for the next day. Leo, now 6, was a bright, happy boy who had no memory of a diner in Harlem. To him, Vic was just Vic, the man who taught him how to throw a baseball and who read him a story every single night, his voice a low, comforting rumble. She watched through the window as Vic crouched in the small patch of dirt they called a garden. He was showing Leo how to plant something. Vic's broad shoulders, which had once been covered in $1,000 suits, were now clad in a simple t-shirt. He was patient, his large, scarred hands moving slowly to show Leo's small ones how to cover the seed with dirt. Lila felt a profound, aching sense of peace. This was her family, built not on bloodlines and lies, but on a shared, brutal choice to survive. They were not just a man and a woman. They were 2 survivors who had decided to stand together. Vic looked up, as if he could feel her watching him. He met her gaze through the window, and he smiled. It was not the ghost of a smile she had seen in the diner, or the pained grimace from the alley. It was a real, unguarded smile, and it was devastatingly beautiful. It was a smile that promised her he was home. Her gaze drifted from him to the old, neglected trellis that ran along the side of the house. When they had moved in, it was just a tangle of thorns. But now, after months of Vic carefully tending to it, a single, perfect red rose had opened, its petals catching the last golden light of the setting sun. It was a new beginning, a life growing from the ashes, fragile but vibrant, and more real than anything either of them had ever known. Thank you so much for listening to our story. We would love to connect with you, so please comment below and let us know where you are listening from and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to the Mafia Boss Story channel, like this video, and support us by pressing the hype button so this story can be heard by more people.